Hello guys, and welcome to another video. This video is going to be about the best strike plane in all of War Thunder, and that's not an exaggeration. The biggest boy in terms of duck-like aircraft, the Sukhoi Su-34. This video is going to be part history, part review, part how to use it, mainly how to use it. Because there are many ways to use this plane, from straight up combat to farming Thunderer wages, a base bomber that cannot be intercepted, and even as a carrier killer. Obviously, it's also amazing at close air support in ground battles, but I won't specifically be covering that today, although obviously it's a very valid use of the aircraft. But the key part to take away here is that you literally cannot be intercepted if you play correctly. So, don't forget to join my Discord down below if you want to have some input into future videos. And also don't forget to smash that like and subscribe, and we'll get into the video. Now, if I show you this image on screen, you might just assume it's an Su-34, but I can assure you it's not. Firstly, it's on a carrier, and you can also tell from the nose and the landing gear, but this is the Su-27KUB, or as it was later designated, the Su-33UB. The design project was started before the collapse of the Soviet Union to find a replace for the aging and expensive to maintain Su-24. The plane we just saw was the basis of this project, the trainer version of the Su-33 with the side-by-side cockpit. This, however, was a naval aircraft with folding enlarged wings, an arrestor hook and other naval equipment, and it first flew in 1990. Although, a few years later, we can see here the so-called Su-32FN at the Paris Air Show in 1995. And you can see it's already taken on its modern form, and it also has the Leninets V004 radar, as you can tell from the shape of the nose. Yet it would take nearly 20 years from this point to iron out the kinks and get it into serial production, entering service in 2014. It just goes to show how absolutely gutted the Russian defense industry was after the fall of the Union. So, what do we have in War Thunder? We have a large, super maneuverable, multi-role aircraft. It has basically the same engines as the rest of the Su-27 family, but the airframe itself is both larger and heavier, so it's noticeably more sluggish, especially when it comes to acceleration. In return, we get an extremely advanced PISA radar, probably the best radar in the entire Soviet tree. We also get an integrated targeting pod, which means we don't have to give up a pylon for that functionality, as well as the ability to use basically every munition the Soviet Union or Russian Federation has ever made. A huge variety of bombs and rockets with every guidance type you can imagine, as well as every top-tier Russian missile. And while air-to-air combat isn't its strongest suit, this aircraft is far from defenseless. So, what exactly does it do? The first role I want to highlight is its unparalleled ability to bomb 3 bases, without ever exposing yourself to the enemy. Now, the outer 2 pylons are dedicated missile pylons. The outer 2 on each wing, I mean, so 4 pylons in total. And the outermost pair only take the R-73 missile, so you're always going to run that with every loadout on this plane. And then the set of pylons one in from that can take, I think, pretty much any missile this plane can carry, but only missiles. So I tend to take a pair of R-77s on those 2 pylons. Again, this will be the same for every loadout. But the real meat and potatoes are the inner 7 pylons. So you can take a total of 6 Grom 2 guided bombs and the massive Fab 3000 UMPK. Now, most maps at this BR range actually have an air spawn now, but if it doesn't, the method pretty much stays exactly the same. We put ourselves into a climb while holding a speed of Mach 1. We then use CCRP to highlight the base that we want to bomb. The keybinds for activating and deactivating CCRP are shown on the screen now. And once we pass 20,000 feet, or 6 kilometers, we can release our Groms, 3 per base. Now, a Grom will easily travel 150, maybe even 200,000 feet, which is 45 to 60 kilometers in metric. They go a really long way. And then, by the time you've launched your Groms and you're finished, fiddling about with your settings, you'll probably be passing 25,000 feet or 7.5 kilometers, at which altitude that Fab 3000 with the wings will easily go the same distance. Obviously, it needs that extra bit of altitude to do that, but just remember that you'll need to be subsonic when you release, so pull back on the throttle if you need to. And then at this point, I usually just level off and then yeet a pair of R77s at high-flying targets and then RTB. You want to ideally go for high-flying targets because they'll be usually too busy fiddling about with their radar to pay attention, or they won't assume that the missile will get to them as fast as it does. R77s bleed a lot of speed, but if you're firing at a target flying in a straight line and it doesn't need to maneuver, it's actually not as bad as you might think. But anyway, that's not the point of this, so you'll just RTB. Now, what you actually do when you're on the base, that's going to come in its own section later, and it will be the same for all ground attack roles. And speaking of ground attack roles, the next role we have is Thunderer Abuse, which you'll use to farm SL, using the Unstoppable wager shown on screen. And as far as I'm aware, doing this with the Su-34 is the fastest SL farm in the entire game, not including things like boosters, for example. It's consistent and it's easy. So the wager only requires anti-mech, which is just destroy the most ground targets out of any plane. And for this task, we're using 3 of the UPAB 1500B GPS guided bombs, as well as 4 Groms on top of that, because why not, right? And the start is very much the same as the previous method. We climb out at Mach 1, but usually our Groms can be dropped from lower altitudes because the ground targets we're going to be going for are actually closer than the bases. You can release them as early as 3 kilometers or 10,000 feet, but really, just to be on the safe side, I'd go for 4.5 kilometers or 15,000 feet. But again, your experience may vary. You can just go with that as like a safe measure and then adjust it as you see fit from experience. Target them using the sensor point of interest on the map. So bring up the map, zoom it in, click the little red box and click it where you want the bomb to go. When you're using the Groms, put your little targeting thing in between the SPAA and one of the howitzers, and you can usually get 2 targets with each Grom for a total of 8. Then with the UPAB, if you're traveling at just below Mach 1 on release, so 0.95 Mach or higher, a good rule of thumb is that it will travel 3 times your altitude in distance. So if you're at 10 kilometers, it will go 30 kilometers. If you're at 30,000 feet, it will travel for 90,000 feet, and so on. Now, you can push this further. You can probably get 100,000 feet at 25,000 feet altitude, or even less with a good launch, but experiment and see what works. The guidelines I'm giving you, though, should give you a 100% success rate. And then if you want to reduce the altitudes from there, well, that'll come with your own personal experience. And so, if you target the UPAB between the bunker and the SPAA, there's a very high chance you will destroy all 4 targets in the little cluster. And actually, in this example game that I'm showing in the background, I actually got a total of 18 targets, giving me a guaranteed Thunderer medal without even going near the battlefield. Obviously, as before, you can also lob off your pair of R77s and hope to get a free kill before you RTB. And the final air-to-ground role that I will cover here is going to be the carrier killer. Because, again, when you're going back to that wager, one of the things that you can get is Rogue Wave, which is for destroying ships. And you only really will need to destroy one ship to get Rogue Wave because, well, nobody ever targets ships, do they? And so Rogue Wave is actually one of the best ways to get stages in the Thunderer task, provided you can actually get a ship. For this, I tend to run 4 HAR-38 MTs, as well as 3 CAB 1500 KR. And these are essentially TV-guided UPABs. To find the carrier, simply look at where your own carrier is on the spawn screen, and the enemy carrier will usually be a mirror image of where yours is. Now, I will say that going for carriers is quite risky and often gives less score. But what I do is I fly out to sea and I fly as low as I can to try and stay off of radar screens where possible. Now, depending on the map and depending on your enemies and where they fly, this has the highest chance of interception because you have to actually fly quite close to the carrier to use these munitions. Bear in mind, you can also use the sensor point of interest, target it on the carrier, and then when you go into the, I say targeting pod, it's not a targeting pod, it's internal, but when you go into your targeting system, it will actually tell you the distance to the target. And once you're getting within sort of 25 kilometers of the target, I would climb a little bit, maybe 10,000 feet, 3 kilometers, something like that. And then target and release all of the HAR-38s as soon as you get within 20 kilometers. These things have a rocket motor, they're pretty good at gliding, they will go the distance, even if the ship is moving away from you. And in my experience, the best strategy is to target all 4 of the HAR-38s at a destroyer, one of the smaller ships, for a quick, clean kill that will count towards your Rogue Wave. Then, once you get a bit closer, remember, you need to be traveling below Mach 1 when you release the CAB 1500s, otherwise you can't release them. But get a bit closer, you can even use CCIP to get a good idea of where the bombs would land anyway, and then release all 3 of your CABs at the carrier. After that, you'll want to do an immediate 180 and get out of there because the carrier has radar and it has HEVT. And it will lock you up and it will blow you out of the sky, so don't get too close to the carrier. I'll also add, don't be too surprised if it takes a while for the carrier to sink. It's a really big ship and it can take a while, but 3 cabs should almost guarantee it to sink. The reason you want to destroy a destroyer quickly, is so that the game doesn't end before the carrier sinks, because if it does, then you don't get your Rogue Wave, right? And now, you've done your mission, and you're returning to base. You've got a choice. Do you want to go to the forward, unprotected airfield, or the rear, defended airfield? Usually this is going to depend on what you're doing. If your plan is to rearm with missiles and then play as a fighter, help out your team, usually it's better to go for the forward airfield, especially if you've done the base bombing method. Because you'll release your munitions quite quickly and you can actually get to that forward airfield before the enemy even has a chance to reach it. This lets you rearm and get back into the fight much faster, and it lets you help out your team and gives you a higher chance of winning, which is more SL and more RP, right? However, if your plan is to then continue to go for bases and ground targets, maybe you've bombed bases and now you want to pick up some ground targets, or the opposite, I would use the rear base. This will give you time to get your big fat duck up to high altitude and release your munitions, and also you won't be too far from safety. Just bear in mind that games at this battle rating tend to be over very quickly, so your munitions might not have time to land, if it's your second sortie. And as an addendum, I will also talk about the ability to play this in the air-to-air role because it absolutely can do that. Just remember that you're big, you have poor acceleration, and dogfighting is something you should absolutely avoid if you can. This plane also lacks a HMD, so even with your super maneuverability, it can actually be quite hard to get a missile off against an agile opponent. The loadout I would recommend is 6 R-77s and then 2 R-27ETs and obviously the pair of R-73s, which are basically mandatory. The best strategy is to fire off an R-77 and then quickly follow it up with an R-27ET at medium range. This can often fool the enemy into only defending as if it's a pair of radar missiles, and they don't pop flares, leading to an easy kill. Bear in mind, you will also be heavily reliant on multipathing at low altitude because you only get 98 countermeasures. Say only 98. Yes, only 98 because... yeah, it isn't nothing, but considering the amount of chaff that you need to pop to reliably notch a missile with the gigantic size of your plane, yeah, you will eat through those countermeasures very quickly. And obviously you're also going to need to set aside a reasonable amount for flares, so you're probably only going to get 60-70 countermeasures, right, for chaff. Overall, though, this is an extremely strong plane when used correctly, and in my opinion is the best farmer in the entire Soviet tree, including premiums. Provided you have access to those wages, it is the best SL grinder in the entire game, and in the base bomber role, it's the best RP grinder. So that's my opinion. Maybe it's controversial. If you disagree, feel free to let me know in the comments why, because I'm sure there are plenty of people with less than stellar opinions of this plane. But don't forget to smash that like and subscribe, and thank you for coming.